Welcome to this high-level dialogue on challenges and opportunities for harnessing synergies between climate action and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and looking at the role of carbon dioxide removal in that context. My name is János Pásztor. I'm the Executive Director of the Carnegie Climate Governance Initiative, or C2G, and I have the honor to facilitate the discussion on this topic between the Executive Secretaries of the 5 regional UN Economic Commissions. And indeed, it is a particular honor as we have an all-women cast of speakers today, a sign of substantial improvements in the gender balance of senior UN officials. So thank you for that. And I would like to welcome all our guest speakers, and I will introduce them in just a moment. But let me say a few words more about the background. So this dialogue is organized by C2G in collaboration with the 5 UN regional commissions in order to contribute to the high-level dialogue on energy. This dialogue will also serve as an opening for the 11th International Forum on Energy for Sustainable Development, which is organized jointly by the regional commissions in partnership with a number of other international organizations, including the UN Environment Programme and the UN Development Programme. Now, a few words about the context. Despite current government commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions under the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, atmospheric concentrations continue to rise, placing us on a trajectory way beyond 1.5 degrees global warming. This poses significant risks to natural and human systems and to our ability to deliver sustainable development. All pathways limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100 with no or limited temperature overshoot require successful and substantial deployment of carbon dioxide removal, or CDR for short. And today's latest IPCC Working Group 1 report makes this clear. CDR aims to address the primary driver of climate change by removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and ensuring its long-term storage. If deployed at a large scale, CDR could slow the rate of global warming and help prevent ocean acidification. Removing carbon dioxide is not a new idea. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, has always considered mitigation to include both emission reductions and removals. What is new is the scale, nature, and urgency of CDR and what this means for its effective governance. CDR techniques vary and include the use of nature-based approaches such as afforestation and enhancing wetlands, or engineering-based approaches to directly capture carbon dioxide from ambient air. Large-scale carbon dioxide removal has implications for energy demand and supply, with potential SDG trade-offs as well as some synergies. The recently published IPCC 6th Assessment Working Group 1 report also confirms the above and adds some new elements, including, and I just pull out 4 points there. One is that given the likelihoods of these scenarios, even deep emission reductions and large-scale deployment of carbon dioxide removal may not be sufficient to reach and maintain the Paris temperature goal. Secondly, the CDR's potential to lower temperatures in high emission scenarios is limited, while the scale of carbon dioxide removal required would be significant. Thirdly, the climate system's full response to net negative carbon dioxide emissions will take centuries to work through. For example, sea level rise will not stabilize for several centuries to millennia, and the temperatures and precipitation will respond slowly. And the last one from that report, CDR has the potential for wide-ranging effects both on the environment and sustainable development, both positive and negative. Now, there are some key governance gaps that exist for large-scale carbon dioxide removal. Some of these are also confirmed in the Working Group 1 report. And I just list very quickly 8 of them. The responsibility for doing carbon dioxide removal. Secondly, the safeguards for sustainable development. Thirdly, challenges for measuring, reporting, and verifying removals. Fourthly, issues of storage, permanence, leakage. Fifthly, planning for and monitoring for the biophysical effects of deployment. Then 6, liability and redress. 7, incentives and financing for carbon dioxide deployment, removal deployment, and finally, access to information, public awareness, and acceptance. Now, some of these priority gaps can be addressed in the near term, including the following: narrow the mitigation gap. That's important to reduce possible future reliance on carbon dioxide removal options, improve inventory data and information management systems, put in place robust accounting rules, create incentives to accelerate research, investment, and implementation, engage the research community in scoping specific carbon dioxide removal options and necessary incentives, improve public awareness of the options, the risks, and the trade-offs, and improve international collaboration and cooperation. And I very much hope that our discussion today will contribute to the above, in particular to the last bullet about international cooperation. So with that, I would now like to move to our dialogue. As a first step, I would like to introduce our guest speakers. First, we have Olga Algayerova, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, or ECE. Ms. Algayerova previously served as permanent representative of Slovakia to the international organizations in Vienna and was State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2006 to 2010. She also served as President of the Slovak Millennium Development Goals from 2010 to 2012. Welcome, Olga. Then we have Armida Sarcia Alice-Jabana, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ESCAP. Ms. Alice-Jabana served many diverse functions, among others, the Minister of National Development Planning and the head of the National Development Planning Agency in Indonesia. She acted as alternate governor of the World Bank and of the Asian Development Bank, representing the government of Indonesia. She was a member of the high-level independent team of advisors to support the ECOSOC dialogue on the longer-term positioning of the UN development system in the context of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. Welcome, Armida, to this discussion. Then we have Roland Dashti, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA. Ms. Dashti is a leading Kuwaiti economist and longtime champion of women's rights, gender equality, and democratic reform. She served as member of the Supreme Planning Council in Kuwait, Minister for Planning and Development, and Minister of State for Parliamentary Affairs. She also held key positions in Research and Development Institute. Welcome, Rola, to this discussion. And then we have Alicia Barcena, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, or ECLAC. Ms. Barcena previously served as the Undersecretary General for Management at UN headquarters in New York, Chef de Cabinet to former Secretary General Kofi Annan. She also had numerous functions in other UN entities, including in UNDP and Unec. And then we have Alicia, welcome to this discussion. And then we have Vera Songwe. She's the 9th serving Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, or ECA, the first woman to lead the institution in the organization's 60-year history, and the highest ranking UN regional official. She has been rewarded with various prestigious titles. Among others, she was listed as one of Africa's 50 most powerful women by Forbes in 2020, and as one of the 100 most influential Africans by Jeune Afrique in 2019. She held a number of leading roles at the World Bank and International Finance Corporation before joining the EEC. So welcome, Vera, also to this discussion, and welcome all of you. I think we will have a really interesting discussion with you and your experience behind this. So with this, I would now like to go and ask you each to say a few words at the beginning, and maybe I would like to start with Rola, if I may, from ESCWA. How does the West Asia region deal with synergies and trade-offs when it comes to responding to climate change objectives and sustainable development goals?
Thank you, Janice. Let me start by saying you just mentioned also issues of climate change vulnerabilities. We are in a region that is very highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, where temperature in some countries have already seen an average increase over 2% of Celsius degrees. Also, we have a water scarcity with 60% of our population living in areas facing water stress. And most importantly, about the topic of our region is that there's a high dependence on fossil fuels, both as a source of supply and revenues and a source of development for a lot of countries in our region. And another challenge is the slow uptake of the renewable energy in the consumption mix in our region. Having said this, what we are trying to do in that context as ESCWA, first we have produced in late June a global report which is providing a policy recommendation and options for enhancing synergies while addressing trade-offs between SDG and other SDG goals to ensure inclusiveness and the just energy transition. And as ESCWA, what we are doing with member states is supporting them in the transformation of the energy-intensive, hard-to-abate sectors, which we're talking about the hydrocarbon sector, towards sustainability by adopting the circular carbon economy framework under the 4 Rs, which you just mentioned, that includes carbon capture, storage, and utilization, and direct air capture into it. We are also supporting our member state in developing market-based policies throughout the value chain to transition emerging technologies from the development and near commercialization phases to commercialization and deployment. And last and most importantly is that we're supporting member states to meet climate targets while respecting their rights to emissions, development, and economic prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that the interesting point is that, well, there are a number of interesting points, but this combination of being in a particularly vulnerable region to climate change and at the same time being so dependent on fossil fuels, that must be quite a challenge. And I was just wondering if you have any insight on how the leaders and the people in the region react to this combination of factors.
There is no question, if I take the GCC countries which are endowed by the hydrocarbons and the fossil fuel, there is no question there is a commitment by various countries, member states, to transition for energy transition, but it's just energy transition, but also to balance between that transition and the economic development. And this is where we're seeing the niche of where is the diversification, economic diversification in the transitions. And this is where the carbon, what we're talking about, circular carbon economy, a transition into it where we can create jobs and opportunities and investments through the economic diversification into it. The second thing is that the region is showing the lowest price in the solar energy production. And you're seeing it in UAE, you're seeing it in Saudi Arabia. There are huge billions of dollars of investments in the renewable energy business, but also there is billions of dollars investments in the production of crude oil and the refineries and the fossil fuels. And there's a lot of investments also to curb into the carbon captures and emissions of gases from the production of fossil fuels. So there is a commitment, leadership, but the region still needs a lot of investments in that things. Having said that, in the hydrocarbon industry, but you get the other low middle income countries. And unfortunately, COVID-19 just exemplified and the challenge further because of the fiscal deficit and the budgetary impacts that it had in our region. And our region, lost more than $180 billion in their GDP as a result of COVID, and we're having more than $280 billion of government deficits during the period of COVID 2020-2021, and this puts an additional burden on the transition and putting the funds and the investments for the transition into it, so that because there's funds needs to be challenged to mitigate the impact of COVID on the people and the economy itself. But there is a commitment. It's slow. We would like to see it further, and that's what we're trying to push and advocate and pushing forward.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me turn to Olga from the ECE. What is the UNEC doing to help countries implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement? And why is it urgent for UNEC countries to attain carbon neutrality and prepare for going net negative? What role could carbon dioxide removal play in this?
Yes, Janos, thank you very much for being with us today. It's for a great introduction for our discussion with my dear colleagues from other regions. So where I see the role of UNEC in the context of discussion of today is, let's go out from our mission. UNEC's mission is to promote pan-European economic cooperation by joint elaboration and harmonization of technical norms and standards. So thus, we provide a right multilateral platform for our 56 member states to support, first, the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and second, very important, a Paris Agreement through concrete and results-oriented activities. So what we do, we call for ambitious and immediate climate action. We encourage countries to accelerate the transition to carbon neutrality and circular carbon economy by setting clear decarbonization goals. So your question was why it is urgent for UNEC countries to attain carbon neutrality or prepare for going even net negative. So I tell you now one number. Countries in the UNEC region need to cut or capture at least 90 gigatons of CO2 emissions by 2050 to meet Paris Agreement targets. And only international cooperation and innovation can deliver the accelerated and more ambitious strategies. The gaps are not addressed urgently. Progressively, more drastic and expensive measures will be required to avoid extreme and potentially unrecoverable social impacts as countries try to cope with climate change. Achieving carbon neutrality will require a holistic energy system approach and all technology strategy. Technology portfolios can be adapted by countries to reflect their unique circumstances, and I'm convinced that we have the technology and the capability to address this problem. What we need, these are solutions that deliver quality of life broadly. This means not only delivering on climate objectives, but also addressing the daily challenges of individuals who are the agents of change and who have their own priorities. We need to define what we mean by fair energy transition. If we consider that greenhouse gases accumulate over long periods of time, then fair should consider how much has been emitted cumulatively since the 19th century as the developed world developed. The developing world should not sacrifice their own quality of life aspirations. The whole conversation misses a very important point, that the solutions can be opportunity-driven. Helping countries develop sustainably means investing in infrastructure, in technology, human development, and in employment. The high-level dialogue on energy and the COP26 provide unique opportunity for the world to put political correctness behind and realize that effective solutions are within reach. We must be pragmatic, agnostic, and recognize that there is not just a single universal answer. What matters is the collective outcome, and we must deliver on the climate agenda while delivering on the quality of life agenda globally. Maybe, Janos, later we can elaborate a little bit on CDR technologies, but I would like, at this point, I would like just mention our technology brief on CCUS technology. Then we have another publication, we call it Commitment Trifecta document, and there is another one, Push to Pivot document, that I believe today we can come back to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And I think we can maybe come back to that later. But I just want to ask you quickly one question. You mentioned you have 56 member countries, and you have some very ambitious ideas and plans here. And you also talked about fairness between countries. And how does that translate within your own region? How do you deal with that? Because the way I see that region, you have a whole range of countries in terms of capabilities, in terms of levels of development, and so on. So how do you deal with that within your region?
Look, the specific conditions in each of our 56 member states are, of course, different. They have different energy mix, they have different technologies available. But as I mentioned, what matters is the collective outcome. So, for instance, we had a commission session on circular economy. And of course, in the EU, we have circularity 11.2%. In the rest of the region, we have about 8.6%. So we want to bring the whole region to the double digits. So the collective outcome. And then we need to see the specific situation in each of our member states. But of course, carbon capture, utilization, storage, and carbon dioxide removal technologies are critical components in viable climate policy options in the region.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me turn to Armida from ESCAP, if I may. And maybe you could share with us some thoughts on how the Asia-Pacific region deals with synergies between SDG implementation and climate action. And how do you see the role for carbon dioxide removal in achieving the climate goals for the region, and the potential role that ESCAP could play on this? Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Janos, and for this dialogue. And I'm looking forward to an active discussion and brainstorming with my colleagues here from the Regional Commission for us to generate more ideas on how to address the challenges of achieving sustainable development goals, as well as the Paris Agreement. We need to do this by looking for synergies. For example, by finding interlinkages between SDGs and using mutually beneficial entry points. Let me give 3 specific examples of such entry points that we are working on in ESCAP. First, on air pollution. The climate crisis is intricately tied to air quality. By reducing air pollution and the greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to it, we address simultaneously also the drivers of climate change, protecting both the population as well as the planet from the negative impacts. This further improves air quality, which in turn generate immense benefits for our health and also our environment. ESCAP in this regard, supporting cities, for example, to make evidence-based decisions to reduce urban air pollution. We are using machine learning to demonstrate that the primary causes of air pollution vary significantly among urban centers, even in the same country and region. Although we understand that quite substantial source of urban pollution comes from a fossil fuel based use of transportation. But we have another example that we found that forest and agriculture fires are the primary source of air pollution, in this case in Thailand, where ESCAP is located. And these findings help us to propose measures that address air pollution and other SDGs at the same time, like goals related to food, agriculture, and life on land. Second example that I would like also to share in this regard is conserving the ocean. The environmental threats to the ocean are human-induced and stem mostly from land-based activities, such as agriculture, including fisheries, tourism, waste management, and industrial related pollution that result in, aside from pollution, and also emissions. Such activities are also responsible for climate change, which stands out, therefore, as a land-based phenomenon, with drastic impacts on marine ecosystems, as well as the people across our region. ESCAP, in this regard, has developed an accelerated approach for progress towards SDG 14 to to achieve synergies with other SDGs and climate action. The approach aligned nationally prioritized development efforts with key activities that can achieve multiplier effects. And the third example is nature-based solutions. Using nature-based interventions in various ecosystems effectively combines carbon mitigation and broader SDG co-benefits by creating jobs and supporting livelihoods, as well as improving air quality and our health. This is especially true if implementation addresses trade-off with the sustainable development dimension. Let me give a few examples that also link to the previous example on conserving the ocean, which is on restoring and conserving coral reefs and mangroves, coastal habitat restoration, restoring and protecting forests and wetland in catchment areas. And countries in our region must scale up, certainly must scale up their climate action ambition and SDG implementation to rapidly transition towards zero carbon development path for especially for the post-COVID-19 recovery. But then again, looking at the current situation and trajectory, the region, as well as the rest of the world in this matter, is nowhere near to addressing the climate emergency as well as achieving SDGs. So therefore, of course, in addition to advocating more climate mitigation, ESCAP and our partners have started, so we just started a dialogue on the issues of this CDR. Over. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and very interesting. I'm tempted to ask you a very similar question, follow-up question to what I asked from Olga, because in a different way, your region contains some of the largest population of the world, and also lots of different economic and other development status. And how do these different parts of your region react to this fantastic work on synergies? Because I think it's really interesting the way you're approaching these synergies. Do you feel that there is similar reactions from different parts of the region? Maybe if you can say a few words on that.
Yeah, again, the development of countries or members in our region are quite diverse. Yeah, they are in different, let's say, development stages. Their development challenges is also different. But I think in terms of climate change, all of the countries face the same challenges. Yeah. And again, in terms of commitment, what we see is some countries are a little bit ahead than the rest of the region. As we can see from the recent announcement, several countries from their net zero emission commitment for 2050, some 2060 and so on, but not all countries are in the same direction. So therefore, again, how to scale up, how to scale up the many good initiatives that are there in many countries in the region that I already mentioned in terms of how to scale up renewable energy, how to scale up also the ocean conservation, how to also scale up the nature-based solutions.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn to Alicia from ECLAC. And maybe if I could ask you to share with us the key findings from a recent report published by ECLAC on a transformative recovery with equality and sustainability, and on the potential impacts of carbon dioxide removal on the SDGs in Latin America and the Caribbean, and thoughts from you on how these might be actually useful for the other regions.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with my colleagues on these very important matters. And indeed, I think that, first of all, I would like to say that today the world is confronting I think we are confronting a very fragmented world. And I think that's something that I want to say at the very outset, because on the one hand, we have countries, for example, that do not have access to vaccines or that are dealing with climate change, while they are the most affected and the most vulnerable, not yet the most large or emitters. So I think this is the second asymmetry. And the third one is financing for development. Now, having said that, I would like to say that the developed countries are investing enormous amounts of money. That is, we're talking about the US and Europe and China that are US is investing trillions of dollars. Europe is investing millions of euros, and China too, to engage in this transformation of their economies, investing enormously on infrastructure and energy, for example. In our region, that's not the case. Our region is facing, of course, the fiscal constraints as many others, but still we propose to them, as you very well say, in this document, we propose a very concrete areas for transformation. And some of them are basically, number one is energy transformation, that is to move electricity, the electricity matrix, to be moving completely to a renewable based matrix. And we calculated the cost and we calculated the benefits. These will cost 1.3% of GDP annually. It will create 7 million jobs, and it will reduce 30% emissions. So for example, this sector is one that the countries of our region are taking very seriously, and even the foreign direct investment that is coming to our region is coming precisely to these sectors of renewable energy. Secondly, electromobility. We are countries that have lithium, so we have calculated how much it will cost to transform the buses into the diesel buses into electric buses. And again, this is very cost effective and generates a lot of jobs. So now what we are doing is trying to engage with companies like Chinese companies to come and invest in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Chile, for example, to produce electric buses for the rest of the region. The third one is related to bioeconomy and nature-based solution. And this is very important as we're going to speak about these ideas of carbon dioxide removal approaches, because nature-based solutions can be one of them. And the other two are circular economy, which Europe has a lot of experience. We're looking what they're doing, and sustainable tourism. Now, in the case of, we are also working very hard on health manufacturing industry, trying to see whether countries can produce their own vaccines, which is another topic. Now, coming back to the actions that we are suggesting, what we are saying is that we cannot work only with the environmental sectors. We have to go to the economic sectors. We have to demonstrate that we have to articulate public and private investments towards these sustainable development sectors, that they are going to contribute, of course, to the SDGs, but they have to contribute simultaneously to growth, to produce jobs, and to reduce emissions. So this is the sectors that we have identified so far. And we are now putting the numbers so people can really understand what we are talking about. Let me talk a little bit about carbon dioxide removal approaches, because we have been using them, the CDRs, as approaches to move into bioeconomy and nature-based solutions. And that is, this could contribute to the decarbonization of the rest of the economy. And of course, we have identified, for example, what could be the case for afforestation and reforestation. And we have been very, I think, very successful in putting some concrete actions on that regard, because in our region, agriculture, livestock, land use change, and forestry are the most contributors to carbon emissions, because they account around to 42% of the total of this region. Of course, this region emits 8.4%, because that's not much. But of those 8.4, 42% account for these land use change and forestry. So that's why we are focusing on these sectors quite a bit. Besides energy, we believe these two can be extremely important. Now, we are demonstrated on the ground how can nature-based solutions be of importance. We just finished, let's say, a study in Cuba in where we are calculating that each year mangroves that are preserved reduce the flooding by 30%. And for example, if in Honduras and in Guatemala, there would have been mangroves, the cost of the hurricanes Eta and Iota would have been much, much less. Now, so preserving nature and restoring the natural heritage is one of the things that we are definitely proposing. Now, Janos, maybe this is time for us to mention the excellent study that we have done with you, the CD2G, in which we are trying to apply the measures that we are, and that you are developing actually, and that we are putting in place here in the region. And it's very important because the levels of climate change today will require global actions, will require a much more profound, I would say, actions than the ones we are trying to take at the national level. We will need definitely actions at the global level. And here, I think what we are trying to pull together are the 7 actions that are connected to the carbon removal, carbon dioxide removal. Number 1 is afforestation and forest ecosystem restoration, which we are calculating in different parts of the region. The second one is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. This is another of the issues that we are trying to pull forward in the agriculture, for example. The third one is land restoration and enhancing soil carbon with biochar. The fourth is enhancing weathering of rocks for carbon capture in soils. The fifth is increasing ocean alkalinity to increase carbon uptake. The sixth is direct air carbon dioxide capture and storage, DACCS. That is something that is not being done in our region, and we are very concerned about this because we don't know what is this has to be done globally, but we don't know what the costs could be for our region. And finally, the ocean fertilization. We have, of course, applied all these actions in 2 countries, Colombia and Argentina, and they have already produced very important results connected to the SDGs. And so I think that we have options, but what we need to understand is which options are global, which options are regional, and which options are national. What we are hearing around the table is all the national actions that are being taken by countries. But the climate change is not a national problem, it's a global problem. So that's where I believe regions like ours need to be carefully discussing with the member states and with the different actors if we are going to undertake global measures to remove carbon from the atmosphere, then what are going to be the trade-offs for regions like ours? We don't want to fall again into this catch-22 in which we are now, that, for example, our region is the most vulnerable, as Roland said, but our region is also very vulnerable in the Caribbean, in Central America, and they are the lowest, the super lowest emitters. Let me finish with this. In financing, why do I feel we have so many asymmetries? Is because the global financing is going to mitigation. And the financing we need in our region, besides, of course, mitigation, is adaptation. And that's where I believe we are not moving sufficiently. Let me stop here, Janos. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but at least I posed the problems.
Thank you, Alicia. And yes, you have addressed many of the points I was hoping you would. But I just want to briefly follow up on something you said, and we don't have a lot of time for this, but still, you started by talking about a fragmented world. And then you talked about global action, climate change, a global action. So now looking at this work in the area of carbon dioxide removal, the work we've done together with you in Argentina and Colombia, do you see any of these kinds of actions that would not only help carbon, which of course we hope, not only would help development, would actually help to make a less fragmented world? Is there something that is more than just simply the carbon and the development, but something that helps the totality?
No, I am absolutely sure, because the study that we did with you, and we hope to continue working with you and maybe engage the other regions to do something like this with you as well, is showing in Colombia and Argentina the benefits of, for example, the nature-based solutions. We are now connecting those nature-based solutions in practice. And of course, the bioenergy and from biomass capturing and storing the carbon, these are some measures that we are applying. And what's happening is that we have key positive impacts. For example, in afforestation, I mean, there's already technology that can help us to move into that direction, but also the creation of employment. I think both Argentina and Colombia are now very well aware that these actions can really bring important benefits for them. And that's why we wanted to go evidence-based, because we, for example, know that afforestation and reforestation presents the lowest cost per ton sequester. It's about $6 per ton sequester. So the largest, and could be the largest emission removal from Argentina, for example. So, and the estimate, for example, is that we could invest $60 to $100 million a year, and this could be a source of primary employment. So what we are trying to demonstrate is that, for example, biochar on soils can sequester 2.5 megatons of CO2. And this has a benefit, it's a very big, high multiplier of GDP and employment. So what we're trying to do, Janos, and I thank you, because we are doing this together with you, is demonstrating how three things, at least from carbon removal, and that is afforestation, DACCS, and biochar, how the three impact on three economic sectors, which is growth, employment, and of course, capture of carbon. So I guess that my thinking is that we should continue doing this together with you, to make sure that because we have to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of these things, you know? It's not only to say, yes, they are going to remove carbon from the atmosphere, this is fine. No, but now, since the emergency and the fragmentation of the world, now why I'm so worried about fragmentation is because our developed countries are being left behind. This is the bottom line. We don't have enough money to invest like the developed countries have, and they are going to, and the gaps are going to be growing bigger and bigger in terms of investment, in terms of vaccines, of course, in terms of financing. So how are we going to have a global response if we have such asymmetries? So yes, commissions like ours, like the five of us, we can advance on studies on evidence-based, but what we need is a global commitment also from the transnational corporations, I believe. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And let me come now to Vera from ECA, and some of the words, Alicia, you just said before, I think lead very much into the question I was hoping to ask from Vera, is how might activities on carbon dioxide removal support and strengthen delivery of other development goals in Africa? Or put it another way, in a more in other words, is can you envisage a development-oriented focused CDR program in African countries?
Thank you, Janos. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with the rest of my colleagues and yourself. And I think the work that's being done by Carnegie on this is quite important, but it's a global conversation. And I think when one talks about Africa, just to give you a set of numbers to sort of position this conversation, we spend today somewhere between 5 to 11% of our GDP on climate mitigation, climate adaptation issues. So that's a lot more than we're spending for the COVID-19 crisis. And so we say that Africa has been beset by, a quadruple crisis, if you want. We have a climate crisis, we have a health crisis, we have our largest economic depression in 25 years. And then we have, of course, now increasing economic instability because also exacerbated by the economic crisis. Inflation is rampant. And so when we talk about sort of climate change, we like on the continent to put it in that context of sort of not an isolated conversation, but a conversation that is coming together, the confluence of different issues that are happening. As Alicia, we see it as sort of, what's happening in the world today is sort of a question around what I would call dynamic divergence. When you watch the news in the developed world today, we're talking about recovery, we're talking about, full employment, we're talking about, is there enough financing, is there enough liquidity available such that, maybe we're beginning to have inflation pressures. On the continent, we don't have as much, we have not yet gotten the minimum level of liquidity that is needed to recover from the crisis. And that is the link to the climate discussion. We have just launched as the Economic Commission for Africa, but also as the African Union, what we call our Green Investment Recovery Report, which essentially shows how countries will be able to get out of the crisis by trying to grow in a more sustainable manner. Now, when we talk about carbon dioxide removal, we on the continent are already sequestering 9 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the Congo Basin, which is essentially about 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide sequestration a year. So we already have 9 billion tons of carbon dioxide sequestered, and every year we sequester 1 billion tons. And my sense is when we have this conversation, sometimes we forget that because we are actually sequestering almost, in percentage terms, an equivalent of what we're emitting, given that we're such a low emitter, right? And so the question is not so much about what else does Africa need to do to sequester. The question is, can Africa use the fact that it is sequestering this much to raise revenue? And there I meet with Alicia and my other colleagues to say, we are one of those continents that will benefit squarely from having a price for carbon. We know what we're doing, we know where we're doing it, and we know how much it's benefiting the rest of the world as a global public good. And I believe that when we have these conversations, then we should start saying, when are we going to finally get this carbon price? If we had a price of carbon at $50 per ton, for example, we could mobilize about $24.9 billion per annum to help us recover from the crisis, actually to help us readdress more carbon dioxide removals, right? And so in some sense, I think that we're in a conversation where we cannot be asking the continents to continue to do more when we cannot, at this point in time, reward the continent and on a market basis, no favors, just making sure that it is a service, it's a common service that we're providing, as is Latin America, by the way, because they also have carbon dioxide sequestration that they have been doing for ages. And we need to ensure, we saw last summer the burning in Brazil of the forest. This could happen on the continent. The $29.4 billion that we're asking for at $50 per ton, which is not the right price, by the way. If we had, doubled that, and we will be at $60 billion per ton, and that's a little bit what we're asking for a recovery from the crisis, is a lot more. Today when you go to the Congo Basin, the people who live around the Congo Basin who have been protecting this green environment, if we start felling those trees, if we stop protecting that environment, the cost of reversal is going to be much higher. And so my sense is, I think if we came behind the IMF, the commission set up by Ban Ki-moon and many others to say, and Alicia just finished with that, saying, everybody's talking about mitigation, but there is adaptation. I think there is a conversation we need to have together to say, what do we do to ensure that when we're beginning to look at how we address carbon dioxide removals, we also address those that have already sequestered some and are able to afford it. So that's, I think, a very important conversation that we must have, is the financing, because anything that we do requires financing. And we don't want to be the continent that comes and says, oh, for us to do carbon dioxide removal, we need more resources, give it to us as a grant. No, we want it as a fair market-based initiative that compensates us for what we are already doing, and not as a charity for something that is suboptimal to what we are contributing as a continent to this conversation. So I think that's the first point that I would like to make. Now, the second point, of course, is that we know that reforestation. Forestation is an important component of carbon dioxide removal. In Ethiopia, the Prime Minister has launched this, very, very extremely ambitious initiative of planting. He started with, I think, 1 billion trees to 3 billion, and this year he's at 5 billion trees. At the Economic Commission for Africa, we are supporting that work, but also supporting it behind the back of job creation and employment activities. So it's not just tree planting, but it is also working with the government to see how we can change cooking stoves. We know that carbon dioxide removal is linked to women's health and healthcare. 23 million women die a year from poor respiratory diseases because of poor cooking practices. So we are also using this process to see whether we can create small and medium enterprise businesses that help to produce cleaner cooking stoves. So that's another important component of that. And finally, we have just finished 10 country studies with the University of Oxford on sort of what does a green recovery look like? What does a carbon dioxide reduction, I would say, maybe not full removal, but reduction imply, and how can one do that? And one of the areas where we can do a lot of that, while essentially, because again, carbon dioxide removal for us has to be a byproduct of something else that we're trying to achieve. That something else for Africa is job creation and its prosperity. So if we assume that carbon dioxide removal is a byproduct of job creation and prosperity, the question is, how can we create more jobs in a way that delivers a green recovery? And we've done some work that shows, in South Africa, in DRC, we're now doing work in Kenya, that better and more improved tourism economies can do a lot more. In South Africa, we show that you can actually increase your value added to your economy by 320% if you actually did a more green recovery process. This includes, of course, energy and, of course, DRC and South Africa. South Africa is one of the only countries on our continent that still uses coal as a way of powering its economy. They could move to a clean, green, sustainable economy and realize a lot more benefits if they were going in a way that was more sustainable and had more renewable energy. On the conversation on renewable energy on the continent, of course, and I think this is a little bit what Olga spoke about, we are looking at a just transition that allows Africa anyway to continue to use gas as one of its base energies as we go into the future. Again, because overall, our emission numbers are low, but our growth numbers are not as high as we would like them. And we believe that that combination is a combination that could deliver faster growth for us in a way that we could realize the revenues and the job creation that is needed to do more carbon dioxide removals on the economy. I would stop here and take any questions from you.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us of the 9 gigatons just in the Congo Basin that is being removed and sequestered annually. I think that's important message. But what I found most fascinating is how you connected the CDR with job creation, therefore part of the development process. And the question, it's a very simple question, is to what extent are these ideas consistent with and connected with the 2063 strategy for Africa?
Oh, they're very consistent and very connected. I mean, our blueprint for development on the continent today is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which is the trading agreement. And part of that agreement looks at, how can we increase our value chains on the continent, build subcontinental value chains. Part of that, we are now working with our airline industry, we're working with the ports industries, we're working with the rails to begin to do smart transportation, for example, to look at, in the case of tourism, to see how we can do and build, tourism value chains. We are working, for example, on the Zambia-Zimbabwe border on cross-border energy projects that ensures that we can actually build an industrial platform based on hydroelectricity on the Zimbabwe-Zambia sharing. The whole concept of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is to harmonize processes and then to improve intra-Africa trade. So I think this conversation is, and post the crisis, we've seen in sectors like tourism that we will not for a very long time see huge influxes of international extra-continental trade. So we need to start building a system of more continental trade, tourism, sorry. So we need Kenyans going to South Africans, South Africans going to Egypt, and that whole sort of intra-Africa trade process, including through tourism, but through small and medium enterprise trade is what is going to deliver both the sustainable energy, but also the jobs and the prosperity for the continent. So very, very linked to, actually not linked, it is part of an intrinsic part of the 2063 agenda.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this. Now, I understand that some of you would like to ask some questions from the others, and I do believe that Armida in particular may have some questions to both to Olga on the one hand and to Alicia on the other hand. So please go ahead and try to keep your responses not too long, because we're beginning to run out of time, but we're still okay, but please go ahead.
Okay, so to Olga, the question is, we understand that in the context of European dialogues, the discussion on CDR is already addressing many questions on how to deal with these new technologies, which include accounting systems and developing incentives. The dialogue in the Asia-Pacific region on the need and options for CDR is just beginning. So you are way ahead, yeah? What are the specific areas of the discussion that can benefit a relevant dialogue in the Asia-Pacific region? Over.
So Olga, maybe you could respond to that, and then we'll come to the question to Alicia in a moment. So Olga, you have the floor.
Thank you, Imogen. Thank you, Armida, for this question. UNEC has taken action to support countries in implementing CCUS technologies and attaining carbon neutrality. This action has focused on 3 core aims, which are relevant for all economic commissions, and they include: first, raising awareness, sharing best practices, recognizing CCUS as an essential climate mitigation option, and consider it when developing national plans. Second, developing, harmonizing, and integrating policies to allow full use of CCUS technology for energy and intensive industries. And the third one is creating funding mechanism. As Vera told, whatever we do requires financing. So funding mechanism for CCUS and directing investments towards modernization of energy infrastructure. Also, we recently published a study on geologic CO2 storage in Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia. These countries host significant potential for CO2 storage, and that report provides for the first time a rather detailed analysis in terms of both cost and geography of CO2 storage potential in eastern part of UNEC region. So anytime we stand ready to support ESCAP and also other sister regional commissions and share best practices from UNEC region about CDR technologies. This is an important and timely topic, and only together we will be able to attain regional and global circular carbon economy. Maybe one sentence, because Vera was speaking price on carbon, and all this would require a real price on carbon and sustainable business models. And political agreement is required for long-term engagement and societal commitment, recognizing the scale and cost of the industry that needs to develop quickly to rescue our planet and species. Back to, if you have Armida more, we can always discuss. Thank you. Back to you, Armida.
Thank you, Armida.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olga. Of course, the understanding is the CDR, the nature-based solution, more towards that, you know, that angle, yeah, not the large-scale CDR. So my question to Alicia, which sectors could be drivers of a just transition to develop economically viable zero carbon footprint in Latin America and Caribbean region? And how is the investment environment in Latin America and the Caribbean region supporting such business and sectoral development?
Alicia, please.
Thank you so much for this very important question. Let me start by saying that in this region, I believe we have at least 3 sectors that are ready to act. One is the energy transition, but the first step for the energy transition is the political commitment. And energy transition towards zero net emissions And I think there are governments in our region that have already committed to this. We have small countries and large countries. We have Barbados, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Uruguay. So the first thing is to have the political commitment so you can adapt the regulatory framework oriented towards that. In terms of investment, we are in a very low moment in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our investment rate is around 17% of GDP, while the average in the world is 26, and in Asia Pacific is 37% of GDP. So we have to increase 10 percentage points in terms of investment, public, private, and foreign investment. Which are the sectors that we believe are there and are ripe to invest? Number one, as I said, energy transition towards renewable. And I think this is something that we are ready to move there. Technology is available. So, and I think we have investors that are ready to go there. The second one is nature-based solutions that we are trying to demonstrate more and more: afforestation, reforestation, and also agroforestry. Now, the problem we have, and I'm so glad to hear about Congo, but let me tell you about the Amazonia. The Amazonia is going the wrong way, because yesterday, there was a release of a study that says that Amazonia now is no longer capturing carbon, but it's releasing carbon. So I believe we are in trouble, very serious trouble, because I don't think, and the second problem of afforestation and reforestation is that people do not understand that it's not only planting trees and any trees, but it has to be related to an ecosystemic approach. So I believe we do need to have a certain correlation there. But the other two sectors where I believe we have enormous options and potential is electromobility. We have already plenty of some cities that are moving very fast to electromobility: Mexico City, Santiago, Lima, Peru, etc. Cities that are of very big proportions. And finally, the circular economy. We believe that circular economy can bring very important reddits and important results to our region. Now, what are the two things that we need for these sectors to be successful? I think one of the questions was raised by Vera. The carbon prices can be a powerful incentive, no question about it. But the other one, dear Janos and colleagues, is licensing of technologies. I mean, we really need a waiver on key technologies to improve our climate change responses. If we are going to pay all the copyrights, and so we do need a sort of a big mission for these ideas. Now, in terms of carbon, I would say, I'm sure that Janos will want to know what do we think about these ideas of CDRs in our regions. And I think the thing is that these three first can be okay. I mean, afforestation, capturing of energy, renewable energy, et cetera, but there are other solutions that might be more risky at the global level, and that's where the things that we need to discuss together. And I'm glad that the five of us are here together to discuss these type of things. I hope I answered your questions, my dear, but I have to say that my region, unfortunately, is going the wrong way, because reprimarization is coming back, extractive industries, because there is better commodity prices. So I guess that there is a long way to go yet to convince governments and private sector that these can bring opportunities in three ways: employment, growth, and reduction of emissions. But we are not still there, unfortunately. Over.
Thank you, Alicia.
Yes,
and
thank you.
Amida, I hope that answers your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Alicia, for the very clear three sectors, three priority areas: energy transition, nature-based solution, circular economy, although it's still a long way to go. Thank you.
And I believe, Vera, you also had a question that you wanted to ask.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Please.
I have two questions, if you may.
Yeah,
And
please
if we
go
have
ahead.
time, I was thinking we didn't have time. I think first, my first question will be to Olga, which is, it seems that the CDR work in ECE is more on the technology and nature-based solutions. Is there something that we could maybe collaborate together on? Are there any technological experiences on CDR in the ECE region that we could use globally? Then to ECLAC. ECLAC has spoken a lot about the C2G2 report, and we are also doing this reports with Oxford University in terms of value addition and what sectors we believe can be more prone for growth and unemployment, which is the first thing, but then also for CDR, what insights and advice can ECLAC give to us? I just want to correct myself, especially given that we're having more and more problems in the Amazonia. I said 9 billion tons, it's actually 90 billion. And I think that what Alicia has just said as well about, you know, the Amazonian forest burning is a clear example of the fact that if we don't work quickly to begin to show these populations that live in these places that what they have and what they have done in the last decades and centuries to protect this forest has been good for humanity, we will end up seeing them just burn, and, you know, all the efforts on carbon sequestration will go in. Imagine if we release 3 years of carbon emissions in 1 or 2 months of forest fires. I think the costs are clearly outweigh the benefits. So like Latin America, we hope that we can get to this together. So it's 90 billion tons that is sequestered in the Congo Basin, not 9. Over to you. And then I think to Amida, I wanted to ask about, you know, the work that is being done in East Asia. You know, carbon pricing is a problem for all of us. Probably on the East Asia side, you will be maybe one of the ones that is paying a little bit, yourself and Olga. How can we come together to have a common voice around the carbon pricing issue, and what can we do? Thank you.
Thank you. So first, maybe Olga, if you could respond, and then we come to Alicia.
Yes, Vera, I was also thinking, listening to this discussion, how we can come together, and definitely we discussed earlier with Janos, so it's already, we are already late, you know, so now we have reached a tipping point, so it's absolutely urgent to act now and make bold commitments now. So sharing good practices is needed, and I'm very eager to work with my fellow executive secretaries and cooperate across all regional commissions. So I would like to invite, for instance, one proposal, all regional commissions, and establish a task force or working group and promote circular carbon economy across all regions in preparation for our commission's meetings in 2023. Circular carbon economy employs a holistic, technology neutral approach by deploying clean technologies, including also CCUS to store carbon underground along the processes that turn CO2 into value-added products. So we need to mobilize to scale up favorable conditions and develop legal, financial, regulatory frameworks together with infrastructure and banking institutions. We need to act now as also CCUS unlocks full decarbonization of energy sector. Countries need to include CCUS in long-term strategies and start retrofitting existing infrastructure. So here is my proposal, Vera, but we can discuss later.
Thank you. Alicia?
Thank you so much, Vera, for this very pertinent question. Yes, let me tell you that in the C2G CEPAL study, where we compare the cases of Argentina and Colombia, we were able to quantify the cost of investments for reforestation, bioenergy, and biochar in soils. And we also measure the cost per captured ton of CO2, the contribution to GDP per ton, and employment, direct and indirect, per ton. Not surprisingly, in Argentina, reforestation is the least costly, with very important contributions to GDP and employment, while in Colombia, the numbers are much better related to mangrove restoration. So, and I believe that large CDR deployments, these carbon initiatives to capture carbon, are a novel field of research and implementations, and costs may fall as technologies mature. So that's why I'm talking about a waiver on technology, Janos. If we want to move further, if we want to go beyond, let's say, these areas of afforestation, reforestation that our regions are okay, then we need to have, first of all, a better understanding of the impacts, socioeconomic. We need comparison among countries. We need the assessment of technologies to understand how can they be applied. But I definitely believe that there are considerable benefits, considerable benefits. It would be great if we can expand these studies to make sure that we understand the benefits of not only of afforestation restoration, but the application of biochar, which I think is very important. And of course, what do we need for bioenergy and carbon capture and storage deployment? Because we need these BECCS to be better understood in our region. Now, the question of I would say how to reduce lower temperature, we believe that we have to reduce the risks of overshooting temperature goals, the solar radiation modification, the SRM. And this is something that we really need to understand much more clearly, because solar radiation modification can only be, addressed by the IPCC, can be quite controversial, especially on the distributional effects. So when we look at the 7 topics of the CDR, we believe that there are some that can be applied immediately, some that will require more analysis, cost benefit, technologies. We need access to technologies in our developing countries. And thirdly, we need to analyze the CRM, which is a more, I would say, global initiative that could be that has to be analyzed in their own cost and benefits, because otherwise it could, I would say, deepening the asymmetries in the world. And that's where I see some role of C2G studies in each region to identify precisely what are the risks that we in each region that we find if we apply these 7 measures. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Alicia. And I'm afraid we're running out of time. We have to close because we're very limited in overall time. So what I would like to do is I'd like to ask each of you to give your last thoughts, maybe 30 seconds to a minute of some of the key issues that you would like to leave behind. And I would like to start with Roland, please.
Thank you, Janis. As we just heard from my colleagues about the importance of action, and I think as we see, it's our moral obligation to ensure that future generations live in a healthy environment on a sustainable planet. And as we see, time is against us, and business as usual scenarios are no longer as an option of action. So urgent and innovative actions by all stakeholders are needed. We think that countries should adopt a circular carbon economy framework, mitigate carbon accumulation in the atmosphere, accelerate commercialization of neutral hydrocarbon technologies, de-risk investments, and step up financing for carbon neutral projects. We also think we must enhance coordination and joint actions between United Nations entities, not only among regional commissions, but other UN agencies, multilateral development banks, governments, and the key player is the private sector. This is an indispensable to reach sustainable development goals and achieve the climate actions agenda. It's not too late, but together we can still save our planet. Thank you, Janis.
Thank you very much, Roland. Olga, if you could continue, please.
I have 15 seconds for Janos. Governments, politicians must be ready to act. We should expect that governments are acting to improve our quality of life. We should expect that governments will act rationally and holistically in terms of economics, environment, and society. Back to you, Janos.
Thank you. Armida?
Yes, so there are several options that can create co-benefits and mitigation potential in our portfolio to address climate change and SDGs, including, again, nature-based solutions, decarbonization, coal phase out, and green energy. All of these strategies should be thoroughly evaluated when and before we consider engineered CDR options. In addition, we need to exhaust the potential of climate mitigation, decarbonization, and the use of nature-based solutions before we consider additional approaches like solar radiation modification. We urgently need to provide the global and regional space to create a dialogue platform for the use and in many cases, non-use of such technologies before they create more and potential problems than they try to solve. Over.
Thank you very much. Alicia?
Thank you very much, Janos. And let me say that I want to thank you because I think you're tapping into the right actors. And that is the regional approaches. You know, although this is a global problem, each region will respond to this problem in a different way. And I believe that we, the regional commissions, can contribute enormously to engage in a discussion in our own regions with different actors that go beyond environment. We need to bring to the table energy ministers, environmental ministers, finance ministers, and I would say civil society as well, because this topic is so unfamiliar to many people. Many people don't understand the globality of the climate change problem. They believe it could be a local solved problem. It's not, but that they are going to be regional costs for this. And therefore, I think we can, certainly the regional commissions can help on this debate, helped by you and other institutions, because I think the UN plays a small role here. We need to also connect the Climate Change Convention with the Biodiversity Convention. I mean, these two conventions do not talk to each other. And you and I, Janos, come from 1992. I mean, I don't want to reveal our ages, but definitely you and I know how difficult it has been to really move ahead, and also the desertification. I mean, we are in a process of desertification in this region as we speak. We have enormous droughts and problems, but I'm not sure if people connect, if communities connect the two together. So I believe that we can certainly sit down and have regional discussions that can then go global, because my worry is that the G20 member states might impose, let's suppose, an RCM solution, let's say, without even considering what the impacts will be for the developing regions. And I think that's where we have to stand very closely together and see if we can organize a sort of a dialogue like this to discuss these solutions, the CDR approaches, with global actors, such as the World Bank and the IMF and the private sector, by the way. I think that the World Economic Forum has to be part of this discussion to see how do we propose a solution that I would say is bottom up, not again top down, because that's not going to help. So count on us, Janos. I guess that the regional commissions, and we thank you for that, you tap into the very right actors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia and Vera. Maybe you want to share with us your final thoughts.
Final thoughts are just essentially that when we look at the CDR problem, it's a global problem. Africa as a continent is a net positive contributor, but we need to find a dimension of reward for the continent so that we can ensure that we continue to be a net positive for this on this issue.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the guest speakers for this really important dialogue. It is through leadership such as yours and your teams and dialogues like this that new ideas can be explored, learnings can be transferred from one place to another, and ideas for cooperation can be brought up. Now, you've addressed many issues, and I'm not going to try to summarize because that's impossible, but I think we all agree how challenging a situation we're in. And the recent report of the IPCC shows us that, in fact, we are in a more challenging situation than before. And we may have to think about these unthinkable additional options that we've all mentioned before. But they're coming back to CDR. I think there is an understanding around the table here that there is a role for CDR. There are linkages to development. It can be positive, it can be negative, and one has to address them. And I think there's been some really good discussion about how one might be able to do that and how one might actually transfer ideas from one region to another. And I was very encouraged to hear from each of you how you are willing to do more and engage with each other on this. So there is a role for international cooperation, and there is a role for the regional commissions to engage in this. But what is also clear is that to manage all this, there will be some pretty, in a way, to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs and not to hinder them. There needs to be a sort of a multi-level short and long-term governance frameworks that some of which are in place already in part, but some which we need to be strengthened in order for this to happen. And finally, a number of you have raised this, and yes, the situation is such that we might actually need to start talking about these unthinkables. And we would certainly be happy to work with you to engage in further conversations, including having a conversation like this one about the solar radiation modification option at some point, the risks, benefits, the challenges, and how one might decide whether or not to make use of something like that. So with that, I would like to thank you for this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you at the next such discussion at some point in the future. Thank you very much.